Good morning. It is good to be here. It is good to see everyone here. And before we get started with the lesson, I have one additional announcement that was handed to me here. There is going to be a potluck lunch on 6/26 for those that are going to be attending the Shut-In Sing. Once again, that's Sunday the 26th. There's going to be a potluck lunch for anyone that is attending and wants to go and do sing with the shut-ins. So mark that in your calendar. All right, so as we get started with our lesson here this morning, you see our text is coming from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 22 through 24. It says, "But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and an innumerable angels is festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the Spirit of their righteousness made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks better words than the blood of Abel." Have you ever heard, and I'm sure you've heard these radio ads or heard them where they say there's open enrollment season for insurance? You know, I know I tend to hear it usually around November. I think a lot of them must do it around. I don't know if that's a particular time. But there's always a stipulation. It's a certain date that you're supposed to sign up, except there's some exceptions. You get a new job, you can change insurance. Maybe you have a child, you might have to make an adjustment. You can do those things. Well, I want you to think about our life today as Christians. Well, we've already accepted that open enrollment call, but we want to encourage others. When I was a kid, I never heard of this type of thing, but nowadays there's a lot of public schools that do open enrollment, where they'll let, I know like Lowville, I know their numbers increased when they went open enrollment because they had 30, 40 kids in a class at a time, and when they did that, it gave them benefits. There is an open enrollment for anyone that would like to join. But before we get there, and we look into that, one of the things that the remote's not working. I just switched it. It didn't. Okay. I tried that, but I guess I switched it back. All right. Have you heard the saying, the grass is always greener on the other side? From a distance, things always look good. Have you ever been walking in the desert and been so thirsty you saw a mirage? All right, so you probably weren't in the desert, but on a hot summer day, when the sun glistens off of certain surfaces, sometimes you can see a reflection which could make other things look like something that they're not. You don't know every step that someone took to get to the place they are in their life. And we sometimes look at the grass being greener on the other side, as a Christian, maybe we'll look at, I'll never be as good as that person. Or I'll never catch up to them. Or I'll this or that. Well, number one, you guys stop thinking about everybody else and start thinking about yourself and your relationship with God and get that right. But the thing is, how do you know? I mean, I've sat down with Christians and, Christians that I didn't even know or Christians I've known for years and sat down and had conversations and we began to talk about our pasts. We weren't celebrating anything except for the fact that God brought us out of those things. I can remember, I must have been in 5th or 6th grade, but there was somebody that came to camp. I don't even remember this person's name, but the idea of it really stuck with me. And he had had a troubled past years and years before. I mean, to the point where he was in prison. I believe it was, if I remember correctly, it was like some kind of a drug problem that he had, and he just kept escalating and escalating. Well, the main thing was, I remembered because at that, he was teaching us at camp at times, and he would emphasize these things and how you had to pay for your mistakes in this life, and how things, and it just always stuck with me. But here I was looking at this guy and thinking, man, this is someone that's, giving their time to the camp, and, you listen to him teach, and you're like, wow, but then you stop and you say, you know what? They had to go through something to get there. They had to go somewhere to become that. Even your parents were young once and did some of the things that you do. Even some of the dumb things. Come on, we've all done dumb things. I'm not just saying our teenagers do them. We've all done them. We, as adults, still do dumb things sometimes. And then we have to turn back to God and say, God, why am I always falling short? We've been waiting for almost 2,000 years for Jesus. Well, actually, we really haven't been waiting that long, have we? The world has. I was doing the math, and I've been a Christian now for almost 30 years. And I'll tell you what, there have been times in my life where, things were tough, and it may have felt like I'd been here for 2,000 years waiting. The thing is, with this open enrollment, I can't give you an exact deadline. I can't tell you the open enrollment is from this period and this period, so we'll say the dates that they put on the commercials is from life until Jesus comes back. I don't know when that's going to be, but hopefully if it is this big, if it's this long, there's going to be a lot of people that join and are there waiting for him when he comes. But now I want to, let's take a look back here. In Hebrews chapter 12, we see an event here. It says, "For you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and a darkness of gloom and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice whose word made the hearers beg, that no further message be spoken to them. For they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touch the mountains, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear." Now, if you were with us a couple slides ago when we read the text, this is all going together here. And what we have here is, I'm making an example of the old assembly with the new assembly. The old assembly met at Mount Horeb, which was not a mountain of God. It was a mountain in another land. Then they went to the promised land. Well, now we see here the new assembly is on Zion. It's on God's mountain. Now, obviously, we're talking about a spiritual thing. We're not talking about physical Jerusalem or the Middle East area. We're talking about God's kingdom in heaven. Now, I want you to think about this scene for a minute, because if you see Exodus 10 through 19, we see, don't touch the mountain. Don't let the animals touch the mountain. And consecrate yourself and remain pure. Now, I want you to look at here verses 18 and 19 of Exodus 20. And this was really kind of the response the people gave to Moses. And the reason I'm reading this is I want you to picture the power of God. I want you to picture what his presence represented. Verse 18, "Now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet in the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled. And they stood afar off and said to Moses, 'You speak to us, and we will listen. But do not let God speak to us, lest we die.'" What a misguided mindset. But I'm not standing up here saying that if I was in their mindset and in their presence that I wouldn't have looked at that mountain in fear and done the same thing. But even if you touch this mountain, I mean, picture what is going on here all around the people. And I also want to point out to you that God initially wanted to speak to his people. And they told Moses, no, you handle that for us. You know, in the Old Assembly, there are 613 laws that were given in the first 5 books of the Bible. 248 of these are do's. 365 are don'ts. So what's the focus on the law, right? Do good and not do bad. Galatians chapter 3 and verse 19. Why then the law? It was added because of transgression, until the offspring should come to whom the promise had been made. And it was put in place through angels by an intermediary. So the great service of the law was to demonstrate to all people that they were sinners, that they needed something to take that sin away, to relieve them of that, so to speak. So you look at that today and you ask, well, what is our old assembly? You know, we're not talking about going from, what we're talking about here is you see the beginnings. I know 400 and some years after Abraham, but you see the beginnings of the nation really coming out now that they multiplied in Egypt. But God has not really made them a nation yet. And one of the first steps is laws. You have to have laws, law and order, in order to form a government or a group of people. And that's what God does. So our old assembly is not another body of religion. It's our old body that we casted off. It's the old body that was transformed by the gospel of Christ. It's the old body that could take anyone, despicable, dirty, unclean, sinner. And I hope you took all 3 of those words that I used before sinner as terms of disgust towards sin, not of physical cleanliness, but spiritual. That's what we're looking at. John tells us in 1 John 2, starting in verse 15, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desire of the flesh, the desire of the eyes, the pride of life, it's not from the Father, but it's from the world. So really, the old assembly holds nothing with it except for sin and death. That's it. But if we are enrolled into the new program, Christianity, God's way, we can be cleansed of those sins. Now I want you to take a look at some things here. This is a little bit of a comparison here. So in Hebrews chapter 12, we see what? We see Mount Zion. Okay, this is the replacement. You know, he's saying Horeb happened over here, now Mount Zion. Well, in the new assembly, we have God, the city of the living God, the assembly of the firstborn, Jesus' blood. So much more, or I don't want to say more as much as so much of the fulfillment that there was of the Old Testament is now coming out in the new, and this is how we see that unfold. You know, I wanted to remind us of the kingdom we now live in and the home that awaits us. The kingdom, the church here on the earth, God's people. Now, Mount Zion, we see in Isaiah 2, verse 3, it says, and many people shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. that he may teach us in his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And then you see here there we go. We got to go one more, right? Revelation 21, a poetic picture of heaven, really. John says, "Then I saw a new heaven, a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with me. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God." We're no longer going to be here in the physical. We're going to be in the spiritual with God. And I want you to picture something and picture in your mind how beautiful this really is. And I guess really, well, if you've ever seen, and especially from the perspective of the groom, if you've ever been at a wedding, most people turn, they look at the bride, and they all say, "Oh, she's beautiful today." They did everything to look good. But, have you ever thought about that emphasis? Like, "Oh, you're not supposed to see your fiancé until after the wedding," and da-da-da-da. But when you're standing up there on that stage and you're waiting, and then all of a sudden the music starts and the doors open, it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. It's what you've been waiting for. And that's what John is saying he's seeing here of this new heaven. It's adorned. This new Jerusalem is beautiful. We also see, here we go, the new assembly, the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven. The church. John talks about the book of life in Revelation 13:8, 17:8, 20:12. Verse 15, 21, 27. We want to be enrolled so that we're on that list. It's a register. The book of life. We all want to be a part of that book. God is the judge of all. And it is interesting that the writer uses the particular character of God a judge in Psalm 7, verse 11. Maybe he's trying to get them to understand that no matter what they believe, God is in control and will judge everybody in the end. Psalm 7 and verse 11, God is a righteous judge and a God who feels indignation every day. I would have a hard time being a righteous judge if I felt indignation every day. Do you realize what that verse is saying? I hope you don't break the law, because we're not supposed to as Christians, right? But if you ever broke the law, or maybe were wrongly accused of something, would you not want to come in front of a righteous judge? Especially if you were innocent. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be proven innocent, but at least the righteous judge is going to try you properly, right? And not take away rights from you or things such as that. So God is a righteous judge. But we also have something that's, I don't know, I guess it helps the situation out, and that's, whoops. So, yeah. God, the righteous judge, but Jesus, the mediator. He's the one that brought us the new covenant. He's the one that shows us how it works. You would stop and you think, and if you're a good Christian today, you may think in your mind, what in the world would cause somebody to leave the new and to go back to the old? Let me rephrase that. Let me modernize that a little bit. How about this? Why would someone leave Christ and go back to the world? I mean, at least the Old Testament, when it was in place, was the right place to be. Jesus, our God, our righteous judge, and Jesus, our mediator, who's going to stand there before the judge and plead our case. This one is good for us, Father. This one is well done, good and faithful servant. We also have the sprinkling of the blood, which is a reference to the inauguration of the tabernacle, which we see in Exodus chapter 29. You know, the blood does not cry out in anguish, highlighting Cain's sinfulness. The blood covers us. It cleanses and sanctifies us. And it calls us sinless. You know, if you go back to the time when Moses was there and they're building the tabernacle for the first time, getting things set up. You know, Moses, he sprinkled blood on the altar and Aaron and his sons to consecrate them. You know, this blood, as I said, it covers us, the cleansing, the sanctifying, and it takes us from being a sinner to salvation. So are you enrolled in the program today? I'm not talking about a man-made program. I'm not talking about something that you can only find in the world. I'm talking about the gospel of Christ. Are you a Christian today? And whatever you left behind, if you are, don't go back. It's not worth it. You know, it's kind of like, I mean, can you imagine someone who's addicted to drugs that gets off of them and cleans themselves up, but yet, and they live for a time period, we'll give them a couple years, 3 years, they're doing great, they stayed away from it, something happens, and they come into contact with something that tempts them, and they partake. Here you had someone who was safe, who chose to go back to something unsafe because for a moment it made them happy. I mean, you think about that. But really it's sinfulness versus being sinless through Christ. And you know what? The grass is the greenest in heaven. You know, if you've ever driven down your yard or down your street, that's one of the things, you know, my street, we decided to move on the street with all the retired guys that have lived all their lives, and now what they do is take care of their yards. So their grass oftentimes, ours is always green. It just isn't just always grass. But, you know, what I'm saying is, you know, if we're looking at heaven as being a better place, we have it right. But if we're looking over the fence with rose-colored glasses, over the fence into the world, thinking there's something better out there, we've lost out. And I hope that you will not give up on that and take advantage of that enrollment that God will give you, that salvation. Become a Christian. Become a part of the body of Christ, a member. And if you're here this morning and you have that need to be baptized into Christ, we give you that opportunity. Or maybe you just have some prayers, need some prayers of encouragement. Maybe you need to come back. You've fallen away. If there's something we can do for you today, please come forward as we stand and sing this song.